I never thought the first man who touched my hand with affection would be a millionaire old enough to be my grandfather, and that I'd be paid for it. I was a virgin, a broke university student who never even had her first kiss. My life was simple, almost invisible, until someone offered me $15,000 to spend Mother's Day with a man I didn't know. Not for sex, they said, just to keep him company. But nothing could have prepared me for how that day would change me forever. I often watch this channel, and I always thought, what if my story was told here? If you're listening, drop your name and where you're from in the comments. Maybe I'll thank you in a future story. You'd think a girl like me, quiet, invisible, always buried in books, wouldn't attract attention. But maybe that's exactly why I did. I grew up with empty cupboards and louder silences. My mum, when she was around, was always chasing someone else's dream. A new boyfriend, a new city, a new reason not to come home. She left for good when I was 16. No note, no number, just gone. I never celebrated Mother's Day again. What was there to celebrate? By the time I turned 21, I was scraping through college on a partial scholarship, juggling 2 jobs, and living off instant noodles and campus leftovers. I wore the same coat every winter and avoided eye contact with classmates who wore designer boots and didn't have to check their bank app before buying coffee. I was still a virgin, not because I was saving myself for anyone, but because no one had ever really looked at me. Not like that. And I didn't mind. Romance seemed like a luxury for people with time and clean bed sheets. Then came the Wednesday before Mother's Day. I was working my morning shift at the cafe just off campus, the kind of place that served $12 oat milk lattes and had motivational quotes on the walls. A woman in her 60s came in, dressed in pearls and a cashmere shawl. She was polite, but there was a sharpness in her gaze, like she was always scanning the room for something better. When I handed her the receipt, she didn't take it. She just looked at me and said, "Do you like older men, dear?" I laughed awkwardly, thought maybe she was joking. Not really. Why?" She tilted her head. "You look like the kind of girl who still blushes. That's rare nowadays." I didn't answer. Just gave her her change and turned to the next customer. But before she left, she slipped me a folded piece of paper and whispered, "If you're curious, call." I didn't mean to call, I swear. I even threw the paper in the trash behind the counter. But after my shift, I dug it out with shaky fingers and read it again. It was a first name and a number. No context, no explanation, just a temptation. That night, after counting my tips and crying quietly over my cracked phone screen, I did something I never thought I would. I dialed the number. A man answered. His voice was calm, polite, British, I think. He said my name like he already knew it. And then he told me exactly what the offer was. $15,000 to spend one full day, Mother's Day, with an elderly man who was lonely, wealthy, and emotionally delicate. He said there would be no sex, no touching unless I agreed. I'd wear something elegant, smile, listen, pretend if I could that I cared. It wasn't prostitution, he insisted. It was companionship. He said I could leave any time, and then he added, "You were recommended for your softness, for being untouched." My stomach twisted. How would he know that? Who recommended me? What did untouched even mean in this context? I almost hung up, but I didn't, because $15,000 would cover my tuition for a full semester. It would mean no more cafeteria leftovers, no more nights crying over bills or avoiding parties because I couldn't afford a proper dress. I didn't say yes that night, but I didn't say no either. I didn't sleep that night. I kept turning the idea over in my head like a coin I couldn't spend. Was this wrong? Was I selling something sacred? Even if nothing physical happened, I sat on my mattress, still wearing my cafe uniform, staring at the ceiling like it might give me the answer. My roommate, Jasmine, was out again, probably with her third boyfriend of the semester. She wouldn't understand. She'd laugh and say, "Girl, take the money. You can cry in a nicer apartment." But to me, this wasn't just money. This was a line. One that once crossed might never be uncrossed. The next morning, I skipped class. I took the long bus downtown and walked past the bakery, where I used to window shop as a kid. There was a strange comfort in watching people buy croissants with no idea how lucky they were. Then my phone buzzed. "Have you made your decision?" The same calm voice. The man who had answered the night before. I could almost picture him. Suit pressed, tie straight, maybe sipping tea while I stood sweating on a cracked sidewalk. I replied with just one word. Yes. An hour later, a car pulled up in front of my building. A sleek black Mercedes, with windows tinted like secrets. The driver, a tall man in his 50s, stepped out and opened the door for me without a word. I almost turned and ran, but something in me, maybe the same part that always wondered what it felt like to be chosen, made me step inside. The ride was silent, smooth, unreal. The city blurred past me in shades of gold and grey, and then we turned onto a private road lined with trees so tall they felt like walls. At the end, a mansion appeared. Not flashy, but quiet in its grandeur, like old money, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. The driver led me through heavy wooden doors into a marble foyer, and there he was, Arthur. That was his name. He stood waiting by a fireplace that didn't need to be lit, wearing a navy cardigan and polished shoes. His white hair was combed neatly, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached out. "You must be her," he said softly, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I nodded, unsure what to do. He didn't leer, he didn't stare. He just looked tired. "I'm not what you expected," he said. "No, sir," I admitted. "You're not." He chuckled. "Good. Shall we sit?" We did, in a sitting room full of antiques and the scent of lavender. He poured me tea, asked me about my studies, my favorite books. He listened, really listened. It felt strange, being seen like that. He didn't mention the money, or why I was really there, not until I was about to leave. "You remind me of someone," he said, almost whispering. "My wife. Long ago, she used to sit just like that, hands in her lap, always apologizing for taking up space." He looked at me then, really looked. "I know this arrangement is unusual," he said, "but I'm not looking for anything inappropriate. I just want someone here on that day, that awful, hollow day. Mother's Day." He offered me the envelope right then, thick, sealed, heavier than guilt. I didn't open it. "Think it over," he said. "Come back Sunday. If you choose not to, keep the money. Just don't tell anyone." I left the mansion in a daze, not because I felt dirty, but because for the first time in years, I felt needed. I held the envelope for 3 full days before I dared to open it. I kept it hidden beneath my mattress, like a secret lover's letter, afraid of what it meant to finally look inside. When I did, my breath caught. $15,000. In crisp hundreds. Neat, cold, impersonal. I didn't feel excitement. I felt shame, like I'd done something I hadn't even done yet. That night, I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked like a girl caught between 2 lives, still clinging to innocence, yet already marked by something unspoken. My hands trembled as I touched my cheek, half expecting to see guilt written across it. I told no one. Not Jasmine, not my professors, not even the journal I sometimes wrote in. When the loneliness got too loud, Sunday came faster than I expected. I woke early and sat at the edge of my bed, watching the sun paint golden stripes on the floor. A part of me wanted to disappear, but another part, the one that had always longed to feel chosen, important, even just once, wanted to go. At exactly 9 a.m., the same black car arrived. This time, there was something waiting on the back seat. A box. Inside it, a dress. Not flashy, not revealing, just beautiful. Soft cream silk, with sleeves like whispers, and a neckline that made me feel feminine without showing too much. There was also a note. You deserve to feel beautiful. No one had ever said that to me. Not like that. Not without wanting something in return. I got dressed slowly, afraid the fabric might tear under the weight of my uncertainty. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked like someone from a different life, one with candles and violins and slow dances. At the mansion, Arthur greeted me like an old friend. No hugs, no lingering glances, just warmth. You wore it, he said, eyes softening. Thank you. He led me through the house, past the grand staircase, past walls lined with oil paintings and photographs of people who probably hadn't smiled in years. In the dining room, the table was set for two, silverware that sparkled like secrets, crystal glasses catching sunlight like memories. He pulled out my chair. We ate quietly at first. Then the stories began. He told me about his late wife, Margaret, how she loved poetry and daisies and could never cook a decent meal, how she used to hum when she was nervous, and how she'd laugh at her own jokes. I lost her 6 years ago, he said, his voice thick. Cancer. Took her voice first, then her smile, then everything else. He paused, swallowed hard. I hate Mother's Day, he admitted. We never had children. She wanted them. I didn't. One of my greatest regrets. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just listened, and maybe that was enough. After lunch, he showed me the garden. It was vast, blooming, strangely wild, like someone had once cared for it deeply, and then stopped. There was a bench under a weeping willow. We sat there for what felt like hours, talking about everything and nothing, and then he took my hand. Not like a lover, not like someone claiming something, more like a man afraid to forget how it felt to be human. I know what people must think of me, he said, barely above a whisper. But sometimes, all we want is not to feel invisible. I didn't pull away, because for the first time in years, neither of us was. That evening, I lingered at the edge of the garden as the sky turned a gentle pink, brushing the tops of the trees with a softness that felt almost deliberate, like the world was trying to be kind. Just for one more hour, Arthur had fallen silent beside me, his hand still resting on mine. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything you could explain with a simple label. It was two people holding on to a feeling they hadn't expected to find. He didn't ask to kiss me. He didn't ask to touch more than my hand, and that somehow broke me more than if he had, because I could feel the grief trembling beneath his skin. Years of silence, regret, longing, and I knew then that this day wasn't about me at all. It was about Margaret, the woman who once sat in this garden, wore these silk dresses, laughed in these empty rooms, and I was a ghost of her, a shadow, a substitute in someone else's unfinished love story. As we walked back inside, he asked gently, "Would you mind staying a bit longer?" I hesitated. "I'll pay more," he added quickly, almost ashamed. But I shook my head. "I'm not here for the money anymore." His eyes welled with something that looked dangerously close to hope. He led me into the music room, a place I hadn't yet seen. There was a grand piano, untouched, and gleaming like it belonged to someone else's life. Dust danced in the fading light. "She used to play," he said, walking over and lifting the cover. "Beethoven mostly. Sometimes Chopin. I never learned. My fingers. Always too stiff." He pressed a single key, a low, lonely note. "Will you sit?" he asked. I did. And then, almost like a ritual, he opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph. It was Margaret. She looked nothing like me. Red-haired, full of mischief, confident in a way I could never be. But her eyes were sad, just like mine. She died angry, he confessed, at me, for not wanting children, for working too much, for thinking love was something I could buy back later. He handed me the photo. "I didn't bring you here to erase her. I brought you here because I never said goodbye properly. And I thought, maybe if I said it in front of someone kind, it would matter more." Tears slipped down his cheeks. "I don't want to be alone when I remember her." Neither did I. So I stayed. I listened to every story. I drank the bitter tea he loved. I watched him close his eyes as he whispered apologies into a room that had once held music. And when I left that night, he didn't try to stop me. He just said, "Thank you." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. Sometimes intimacy isn't about bodies. It's about witnessing someone's truth when they're too broken to hold it alone. And that was the most intimate thing I'd ever done. The next morning, I woke up with the scent of lavender still clinging to my skin, like the memory of something too fragile to last. The dress hung on the back of my door, untouched again, almost glowing in the morning light. A ghost of the girl I had been the day before. I expected it to be over, a one-time experience, a strange, intimate memory I'd pack away and never speak of. But at noon, another message came. He would like to see you again, for lunch this Friday. He insists on paying for your time. I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart twisting in ways I didn't expect. It wasn't the money that made me hesitate. It was how I felt when I left that mansion. Seen, needed, whole in some small, unfamiliar way. Still, I didn't reply. Instead, I went to work, pretended to care about spilled coffee and rude customers, laughed at Jasmine's stories about failed Tinder dates, nodded when my professor talked about existentialism and Sartre's idea that we define ourselves through our actions. But what did my actions say about me? That night, I found myself walking alone through campus. The air was warm, but I felt cold inside. Every face I passed seemed wrapped in certainty. Students planning futures, lovers making promises, and I was balancing between shame and longing. When I got home, there was a small package on my doorstep. No note, just a cream-colored envelope inside, along with a letter pressed into the softest paper I'd ever touched. It was handwritten. "Dear Clara, forgive the formality of having someone else contact you earlier. I didn't want to make assumptions, but since you left, the house has felt colder. I know I shouldn't ask again. It's selfish, but there is something profoundly healing about your presence. You don't speak too much. You don't fill the silence with noise. You simply exist, gently. That is rare and beautiful. If you come again, I promise. No expectations, just lunch, just company. And if you never do, please accept this as a thank you. Arthur." The envelope held another $5,000. I cried, not because I felt bought, but because I didn't. He wasn't trying to own me. He was trying to feel something that money could never truly buy. Connection. Still, I wasn't sure if accepting it again would make me someone I couldn't look at in the mirror. I lay awake that night, thinking of his trembling hands, his stories, the way he said, "Thank you," like it was the first time someone had stayed, just because they wanted to. And before dawn, I texted back, "I'll come. But not for the money. I'll keep it. But that's not why I'm saying yes. I didn't expect a reply, but he sent one anyway. Just 3 words. You saved me. I wasn't sure that was true, but I wanted it to be. When I arrived on Friday, I noticed something different. Arthur was waiting at the door. Not his butler. Not a quiet staff member in the shadows. Him. He looked smaller than I remembered. More fragile. But his eyes, those ocean-colored eyes, were brighter, expectant, like a child hoping a guest would still come to his birthday, even if everyone else had forgotten. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said softly. I wasn't either, I whispered. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his whole posture. Shoulders relaxing, breath softening. This time lunch was lighter, less formal. We ate sandwiches in the sunroom, while a jazz record played in the background. He told me about his time in Paris, about losing a painting once that was worth more than his house. I laughed, and for the first time, it didn't feel out of place. After lunch, he led me somewhere new. The library. It was enormous. Walls covered floor to ceiling with books that smelled like time. Velvet chairs, a fireplace, and a strange quietness that made even the dust feel sacred. But what caught my eye was the portrait, a large oil-painted image of a young woman in her 30s, red hair, green dress, hands folded neatly on her lap. Margaret. You look at her the way I used to, Arthur said behind me. How's that? I asked, like she was too good to be real. He walked past me and gently touched the corner of the frame. She wasn't perfect. She had a sharp tongue, too much pride, and a terrible temper when she drank, but she loved with her whole soul. He paused, then said something that froze the air in the room. She never forgave me for keeping secrets, for being emotionally distant, for shutting her out when she needed me most. I didn't ask what the secret was, but I could feel its weight in his silence. She wanted children, he finally admitted, begged me, and I said no. Every time, I thought I was protecting her from my own failures, from the fear that I'd ruined something innocent. His hands clenched, and then she got sick, and suddenly the chance was gone. I stood beside him, not sure whether to speak or simply witness. You don't remind me of her, he said. Not really, but there's a calmness about you, a kind of forgiveness in your silence. That's why I wanted you here. I sat down, unsure if I had earned such a comparison. Can I ask you something? I said, my voice barely above a breath. He nodded. Why me? He looked at me for a long time, then said, because you listen like someone who's been hurt, but chose not to harden. I didn't reply. Couldn't. His words cut deeper than I expected. Before I left that day, he pressed something into my hand. Not money, a small velvet box. Inside, a delicate gold locket with a daisy etched into the front. It was hers, he said. She would have liked you. I almost gave it back, but something told me. It wasn't really a gift. It was a confession, and I was the only one left to receive it. The locket felt too heavy around my neck, not in weight. It was light as a whisper, but in meaning. It had once rested against another woman's heart, heard the rhythm of her life, and now it rested against mine, like a secret being passed from ghost to girl. After that visit, I started coming every week, not for money, not even for the company, but for the quiet. With Arthur, silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. We had tea in the greenhouse, read poetry under the garden trees, watched black and white films in his dusty home theater. Sometimes we didn't speak for hours. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, as if trying to memorize my face, before time stole it too. I never stayed past dark, and he never asked me to, but something in the air was shifting. like we were tiptoeing toward a truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. It finally came on a rainy Tuesday. I arrived unannounced, soaked and shivering from the bus ride. He greeted me at the door with a blanket, but his hands were trembling worse than usual. His skin looked pale, almost waxy. "Are you all right?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wasn't simple. He didn't answer. Instead, he led me into the library, where the fire was already lit, as if he'd been waiting. He sat slowly, his breathing shallow. "I went to the doctor yesterday," he said, staring into the flames. "I hadn't told you because I didn't want pity." I sat beside him, the locket pressing into my chest like a stone. "It's pancreatic cancer," he said quietly. "Stage 4. It's moving fast." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "I have maybe 2 months, if I'm lucky," he added. And then he looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not fear, not sadness. Relief. "I've lived long enough," he said, "but not deeply enough. And now I suppose I'm trying to make peace with that." I reached for his hand. He let me hold it. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," he said. "You're a stranger. You don't feel like one to me," I whispered. He smiled at that, a tired, grateful smile. Then he said something I never expected. "I want you to help me plan my goodbye." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I want to die on my terms," he said, "with music, with peace, with someone who won't look away." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Not to end things early," he clarified quickly. "Just to make the end beautiful, as beautiful as it can be." The fire crackled beside us. I looked into his eyes and saw not just a man facing death, but a man begging not to be forgotten. "I'll be here," I said, my voice shaking. "Every week, as long as you want me." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't about charity, or guilt, or some twisted arrangement. This was about presence, and the grace of being chosen, even at the edge of goodbye. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I found the door. Arthur had fallen asleep in the reading chair, a wool blanket over his legs, and a book slipping from his fingers. I didn't want to wake him, so I wandered, not snooping, just exploring. The house had become oddly familiar, yet there were still corners I hadn't dared enter, like the corridor behind the kitchen, past the old pantry shelves filled with forgotten china and dusty preserves. That's where I saw it. A narrow door, almost invisible in the wood-paneled wall. No handle, just a small brass keyhole. Curiosity tugged at me. Later that evening, when Arthur woke, I asked him gently, "What's behind the small door in the pantry corridor?" He didn't look at me. Instead, he stared into his tea, silent. Then slowly, he rose. "I suppose it's time." He led me there himself, produced a small key from a chain around his neck. When the lock clicked, it was like the sound of a secret exhaling. The room was dim and windowless, lined with letters. Dozens of them, hundreds, stacked neatly in boxes, organized by year. And on the wall, a collage of sonograms, tiny, grainy images, notes, hospital documents. I turned to him, heart thudding. "She did get pregnant," he said quietly. "Twice. The first time she miscarried at 4 months. The second, I told her I wasn't ready. She terminated. I never forgave myself, and she never forgave me either." He ran his fingers along a yellowing envelope. "These are all the letters she wrote to our future child. She kept writing them, even after she knew there'd never be one." I swallowed hard, overwhelmed. "She left them to me when she died," he continued. "Said I could read them when I was finally brave enough." "And have you?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not one." I knelt beside the nearest box, gently pulling out a letter. to the little one who might have had my laugh and his stubborn eyes. I stopped reading, my throat closed. "You kept this room locked all these years?" I asked, voice cracking. I thought if I buried it deep enough, I wouldn't have to feel what I lost. He sat slowly on the floor beside me, trembling, vulnerable. "I want you to read them to me," he said suddenly. "Not all, just one a week, until I can face them myself." I didn't answer. I just unfolded the letter. And as I read Margaret's words aloud, full of longing, sorrow, impossible love, Arthur closed his eyes and wept like a man, no longer running from the truth. And for the first time, I felt like more than a stranger. I felt like a witness to something sacred. The following week, when I arrived at the mansion, something was different. The staff was gone. The air felt stiller, as if the house itself knew time was slipping away faster than expected. Arthur met me at the door in his robe, pale and thinner than before, but with a quiet fire still flickering behind his eyes. He didn't offer tea, didn't lead me to the garden. Instead, he walked slowly to the music room, the one with the untouched piano and the lingering scent of rosewood. He sat at the edge of the bench and motioned for me to sit beside him. "I want to give you something," he said. I frowned. "Arthur, you've already—" "No," he interrupted gently. "Not money, not jewelry. Something different." He reached into a drawer beside the piano and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a legal document, a trust. My name was on it. "I want to pay for your entire education," he said softly. "Every last cent. Graduate school too, if you choose. I've set it all up through my lawyer. It's yours. If you'll accept one thing in return." My chest tightened. "What thing?" I asked. He hesitated, then turned toward me, eyes glistening. "I want you to stay with me until the end." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. "I'm not asking for anything physical," he added quickly. "Just your presence, your time, a promise that when the moment comes, I won't die alone." Silence fell between us, so loud it rang in my ears. "I don't want a nurse," he said. "I want someone who already knows my story, someone who doesn't flinch at who I've been." I stared at the document. It was more money than I'd ever imagined, the kind of support that could rewrite the entire course of my future. But it came with a price I wasn't sure I could pay. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to watch someone die," I whispered. He nodded, understanding in every line of his face. "I didn't think I was strong enough to live with my regrets," he said. "But I have. And now, I want the ending to matter." I left that night without answering, the locket pressed against my chest like a heartbeat not mine. On the walk home, I cried so hard my legs gave out halfway down the block. I sat on the curb, clutching the folded trust paper in my lap, and felt the weight of every decision I'd ever made. Was this love? Was it grief? Was it a transaction? Or something too human to fit inside any of those words? I didn't sleep that night, but when the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. I returned the next day, before sunset. No driver, no black car, just me, walking with the folded trust document pressed to my chest and fear knotted in my throat. Arthur opened the door himself. He looked surprised. Not that I came, but that I came without hesitation. "I don't want the money," I said before he could speak. He tilted his head, puzzled. "But I'll stay," I continued, "because I care. Because I'm not a nurse, and I'm not your daughter, and I'm not Margaret, but I am someone who sees you." He didn't answer right away, just nodded once, as if that was the only blessing he needed. And so it began, our strange, beautiful routine. In the mornings, I read him one letter from the hidden room. Each was a whisper, from a woman I'd never meet, but somehow felt connected to. A woman who once hoped for a child, with eyes like hers and laughter like his. In the afternoons, we played records. He taught me how to appreciate jazz. Not just listen, but feel it. Sometimes we sat in silence while the music filled the space between words we didn't have to say. He had bad days too. Days when his hands trembled too much to hold a teacup, when he forgot names, misplaced objects, stared out the window like he was already halfway gone. But he never stopped thanking me, even for the small things. A warm blanket, a smile, a moment of laughter. Once, while I was trimming the garden roses, he whispered, "You remind me of who I wanted to be when I was young. Brave, but soft. Curious, but kind." He never touched me beyond the occasional hand on mine. Never crossed a line. Never made me feel anything but respected. But intimacy has many faces. And what grew between us in those weeks? It wasn't romantic. It was deeper. He trusted me with his ending. I watched him write letters to old friends he hadn't spoken to in decades. Helped him record a voice message for his estranged sister in England. I even taught him how to use a camera phone. He took a single photo of me in the garden. "For the moment, I forget what light looks like," he said. Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I'd sit beside his bed and just listen to his breathing. Steady, fragile, human. And one night, he whispered into the dark, "I used to think love had to be earned or taken. But you gave it just by staying." I didn't answer. I just held his hand, because sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's just showing up, again and again, even when the door between life and death is already starting to open. It happened on a Sunday. Of course it did. The morning of Mother's Day arrived wrapped in the soft scent of spring rain. The garden was soaked, glistening, and for the first time in weeks, Arthur couldn't rise from bed. He was weaker, paler. The space between his breaths stretched like silence being pulled apart. I sat beside him, brushing a warm cloth over his forehead. He smiled when he saw me. Not fully, just a flicker at the corners of his lips. "You stayed," he whispered. "Always," I said. We didn't talk much that day. Instead, I read one final letter. It was dated the year Margaret died. "To our child who never came, if you were here, I'd tell you not to wait for love to be perfect before you give it. Your father didn't understand that in time, but I think, deep down, he always tried. And trying matters more than most people admit." I looked up. Arthur's eyes were closed, tears trailing down his temples. "She forgave me," he said. "Didn't she?" I nodded, even though I didn't know, because maybe forgiveness isn't a fact. Maybe it's a choice we offer those who are brave enough to ask. I helped him sit up, helped him dress, slowly, in a soft wool sweater and slacks. He insisted on it. "For dignity," he said. And then together, we went to the garden. He couldn't walk far, so I wheeled him to the willow bench, the same one where I first held his hand. He looked around, at the flowers, the sky, the shadows falling long across the earth, and smiled like he was finally home. And then, very softly, he said, "Would you play the piano?" I hesitated. "I don't know how." "Then just sit there," he said. "Let the room remember the weight of hope." I did. When I returned to his side, he was asleep, but his hand was still warm. It wasn't until the wind picked up, brushing petals across the stone path, that I realized he wasn't breathing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just held his hand and whispered, "You mattered. You mattered to me." The doctors came. The paperwork was signed. His lawyer arrived with a calm voice and red eyes. Told me the trust would be honored. Told me Arthur had written something for me, a final letter. I didn't open it that day. I waited until the sun had set and the house was quiet again. And when I read his words, I understood what this entire journey had really been. Not a transaction, not a mistake, but a miracle wrapped in grief. A strange, quiet love that neither of us expected, but both of us needed. It's been 8 months since Arthur passed. The garden still blooms. The willow bench is still there, though the cushion has faded from sun and time. Sometimes I sit on it alone, wearing the same cream-colored dress he once sent me. Not because I want to relive the past, but because I need to remember that it happened. I visit every Sunday. The new caretakers know me by name. The house was never sold. Arthur left it in trust, along with the letter stating it should be preserved as a sanctuary for forgotten beauty. He asked that the library be open once a week to students who need quiet, who need stillness, who, like me once, are trying to survive while holding on to something invisible. I finished my degree, debt-free. I'm applying to graduate school now, for literature. It feels strange, even saying it, as if I'm allowed to dream bigger than just surviving. The locket he gave me never leaves my neck. Sometimes I wonder what Margaret would think of all this, of me, of how two strangers found each other through her memory, and turned grief into something living. Arthur's last letter sits folded in my journal. I read it on the nights I feel most lost. Clara, you gave me more than time. You gave me the dignity of being remembered, not for what I owned, but for who I tried to become when it was almost too late. If anyone ever tells you that kindness is weakness, show them this letter, because your kindness saved a man who was already halfway gone. Love, Arthur. Some nights I still hear his voice in the music room, feel his presence in the soft creak of floorboards, or the smell of old lavender, but I don't cry anymore, not like before, because his story didn't end in silence, and neither did mine. If you stayed until the end, thank you. I'm not the same girl who answered that call, and maybe, just maybe, you're not the same either. Leave your name and where you're from in the comments. I'd love to know who listened all the way through.